Chapters 31 and 32 of Her Mother's Secret. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gage. Chapter 31. A Fool's Errand. When young Roland Bayard left the Forest Rest, with Leonidas' force's supposed challenge in his pocket, and on warlike thoughts intent, he walked rapidly on toward the Calvert House, an old-fashioned and highly respectable roadside establishment, half farmhouse, half tavern, notable for its pure liquors, fine tobacco, and rare game, in season. It was a favorite house of call for travelers on that road, and of sojourn to travelers who might be detained, by business or by accident, in the neighborhood. It was full 4 miles from Forest Rest, but as young Roland owned no saddle horse, he had to walk all the way. No very great hardship, indeed, for a strong, young man, on a fine winter night, when the moonlit sky and the snow-covered earth made the scene almost as clear as day. Roland crunched along the little footpath leading through the wood to the highway, and then walked rapidly over the hard, frozen road, a very solitary road at that hour of the night. High woods flanked it on either side, opening occasionally, now on the right and now on the left, to show some farmhouse, with its barns, fields, gardens, and orchards. It was still early in the winter evening when he reached the Calvert. It was a very quiet-looking place, a 2-story, double-brick house, rough cast, with white stucco, and having 4 dormer windows in the front roof, 9 long windows in the upper floor, and 8 on the lower, that is, 4 on each side of the entrance door. On the right-hand side was the public parlor. On the left-hand side, the bar. A buggy and 2 saddle horses before the door were the only signs of business about the place. Roland went into the bar and inquired if Col. Anglesea was in the house. "No, he has not been in since morning," was the answer. "When is he expected?" inquired Roland. "Don't know. He said he might not return to night." Roland borrowed a newspaper, and sat down to while away a tedious evening. People came in and went out, but as early as 10 o'clock the barroom was nearly deserted. "Do you think the colonel will be likely to return during the night, after the house is closed, for instance?" inquired Roland. "Don't know at all; but even if he should come in after we have shut up, there'll be somebody to let him in. Is the colonel a friend of yours?" "Do you want to insult me?" demanded young Roland, firing up. "Oh, no, not at all. No offense. I only asked because you seemed so anxious to see him," mildly pleaded the bartender. "One may be anxious to see a fellow from other motives than friendship," said Roland, sulkily. "So they may," conceded the barkeeper. "And ever since that rumpus in the church that broke up the wedding, there's a good many people who are anxious to see the colonel out of curiosity." "Ah, they want to see what the monster looks like who, having a living wife, tries to marry an heiress." "Yes, and I reckon that is why the colonel keeps pretty much out of the way. He came here the afternoon of the wedding day, before we had heard of the fuss at the church, and though we wondered much to see the bridegroom here alone, we couldn't ask any questions. He engaged a room, and then hired a horse and buggy and went off. He hadn't been gone an hour before people began to come in and talk of the broken-up wedding. We took in a great deal of money all the afternoon on account of people gathering here to talk and to hear about the affair. And toward night comes a cart from Mondreer, loaded with all the colonel's trunks, pistol cases, hat boxes, fowling pieces, and what not. They were all taken up to his room, but the colonel did not come in until near midnight, and he went away again this morning before sunrise, leaving word that he might not be back to-night. Well, it is 10:30, and he has not returned. I am waiting to see him on very important business, so I think I must take a bed here, and see my gentleman in the morning," Roland decided. "All right," the barkeeper replied, and he rang a bell that brought a negro waiter to the counter. "Show this gentleman into the front room over the parlor, and make him comfortable. Would you like a fire, sir?" "Fire? No, of course not. Thank you, all the same," laughed Roland, as he followed the negro man upstairs to the room assigned him. Roland was wholesomely tired, for he had been traveling on horseback or on foot for nearly 48 hours. Nevertheless, he waited up until he heard the house closed for the night. Then, when all the calling up and down stairs, the walking back and forth along the passages, the banging of doors and the clattering down of windows had ceased, and the lights were out, and the premises were dark and quiet, Roland went to bed and went to sleep. He slept the sound, deep, dreamless sleep of youth, health, and fatigue. It was quite late in the morning when he awoke. The sun was gleaming in golden needles through the interstices of his window shutters. For a moment he did not know where he was, or how he had come into the strange room. In another instant he recollected himself and his errand. He jumped out of bed and threw open the window shutters. It was very cold, and there was no fire, and the water on the washstand had a thin layer of ice over it. But Roland did not ring for a waiter to bring either fuel or hot water, for he was inured to hardships and accustomed to waiting on himself. He broke the ice in his ewer, washed his face and hands, wiped and rubbed them with a coarse, crash towel until they shone and glowed, then put on his clothes, and hurried downstairs and into the bar. There was no one in it at that hour but the bartender and a negro boy. "Good morning," said the former. "You are late this morning. Fatigued and overslept yourself, perhaps." "Yes. Did Col. Anglesea return last night?" "He did. He came in about an hour after the house was closed. Pete opened the door for him." "And where is he now? Can I see him at once, do you think?" eagerly inquired Roland. "I don't suppose you can see him at once, for Heaven only knows where he is. He took breakfast at sunrise, and went off in a buggy, saying that he should not return to night." "Oh!" exclaimed Roland, with a perfect howl of disappointment. "And he has gone?" "Yes, gone." "Where? Where?" "He did not say, so we do not know." "When will he be back?" "He said that he should not return to night. Further than that, we do not know." "Oh! Why did you not have me called? Why did you not detain him and send for me?" demanded Roland, in the tone of a deeply injured individual. "My dear fellow, I did not happen to see the colonel or hear of him until after he was gone. The head waiter had charge of him, and gave the message he left for the house," mildly pleaded the bartender. "Oh! What a disappointment!" cried Roland, leaving the bar to go in search of the head waiter. He found that functionary in the public dining room, and questioned him closely in regard to the movements of Col. Anglesea; but the head waiter could only repeat the message left with him by the colonel, and this, of course, threw no new light on the subject. Roland went out and questioned the hostler, but the latter knew even less than the others about the missing guest. Finally Roland, in spite of his disappointment and anxiety, feeling the keen hunger of a healthy youth, went in and sat down and ate a very hearty breakfast. Then he paid his bill and left the Calvert, leaving every one, from the host to Boots, wondering what on earth the young man could have wanted with the colonel, to have kept him waiting all night for him. But finally some one remembered that Mr. Roland Bayard was mate of the ship which had brought the colonel's forsaken wife his first wife, as they called her from California to Maryland, and that the same Mr. Roland Bayard had escorted the lady to the neighborhood, and had even introduced her to his own aunt, the good Miss Sibby Bayard, who had entertained the stranger without knowing who she really was, or what the nature of her business in the neighborhood might be. Therefore, the gossips and wiseacres of the Calvert decided that young Roland Bayard must be a messenger from "his first wife." Roland, meanwhile, unmindful of the discussion he had left behind him, sturdily strode on his way over the frozen highroad, under the winter sky, toward Greenbushes, to report to Leonidas Force. Greenbushes was full 5 miles from Calvert's, so he walked on. CHAPTER XXXII PREPARING FOR FATE Leonidas Force, after leaving Forest Rest, put spurs to his horse and galloped all the way to Greenbushes, only pausing when it became necessary to open a gate that crossed the road, by which chance the hard-pressed steed got a moment in which to recover his wind. When he reached Greenbushes he sprang from his saddle, threw the bridle to a boy who came up to take the horse, and hurried into the house. His colored housekeeper came to ask him if he was going to stay home all night, or to return to Mondreer, so that she might know whether she was to get supper and to make a fire in his bedroom. Le told her that he should stay at home all night. The woman went away to attend to his comforts. Le opened the door of that little oak-paneled parlor on the right of the hall of entrance, where there was always a fire kept alive for the master, and a round table covered with account books, piles of paper, bundles of pens, and bottles of ink. Le threw off his riding coat, hat, and gloves, drew off his boots, thrust his feet into slippers, and dropped into the large leather armchair before the table, and laid his head upon his folded arms on its top. Le was not the least of a coward. He knew no fear. Yet he fully realized the awful gravity of the situation in which he had voluntarily placed himself. His Christian conscience began to trouble him. "Thou shalt not kill," it whispered to him. He tried not to hear it. "The dastardly villain ought to be punished," he said to himself. "My uncle cannot call the beast out. He is a justice of the peace. He is a vestryman in the church. He is a husband and a father. He cannot fight the monster. And he has no son to act for him. I am his nearest male relative, and I have no ties to bind me and keep me from doing a man's part in this matter. It seems my duty. I do not want to kill the wretch, though he deserves to die. I do not want to kill him. I think I would far rather he killed me. But I cannot help it. I must call him out, and he must take the risk. I must avenge Odalite." His conscience again spoke: "Vengeance is mine, and I will repay, saith the Lord." Luke, an old servant attached to the plantation, came in and laid fresh logs on the fire, and then went out again. But Le, absorbed in his argument with his own conscience, never noticed the man's entrance or his exit. "The die is cast now," he said, in conclusion, "and I must abide the issue. The challenge is sent. The scoundrel is a soldier, and he will accept it. I must meet him, and if I kill him I must take the consequences in this world and in the next." Martha, the housekeeper, came in with a large tray on which she had arranged her master's supper. She set it down on a side table while she removed the books and stationery from the center table, and spread a white cloth over it. Then she set out his supper, and said: "Do, please, young marster, try to eat somefin'. That racket at the church seems to have upset yer so that yer look downright ill." Le was feverish and thirsty, and he drank cup after cup of tea, nearly as fast as the housekeeper could pour it out. But he could not eat a morsel. "'Deed, I'm feared you're gwine to have some sort of a fever, young marster, 'deed I am," said Martha, as she began to clear the table, after finding all her persuasions fruitless to induce the young man to eat. When the woman was gone, Le replaced all the paper, pens, and ink upon the table again, and sat down, poor fellow, to write his "last will and testament." It was very short and plain. He left all his real estate and personal property to his three dear cousins, Odalite, Wynnette, and Elva, daughters of his dear relative, Abel Force, of Mondreer, share and share alike, subject only to some trifling legacies to old servants, and to a bequest of $10,000 to his dear friend Roland Bayard, of Forest Rest, and he constituted Abel Force and Roland Bayard joint executors. Next he wrote farewell letters to his friends and relatives. All this work kept him up long after midnight. When it was finished, he gathered all the documents together and took them with him up to his bedroom, and locked them in the upper drawers of his bureau. Finally, with the guiltiest conscience, the darkest spirit, and the heaviest heart that he had ever experienced in his young life, he laid himself down on his bed. He could not sleep, and he dared not pray. Never before had he laid down to rest without having prayed. But how could he pray now, when he was deliberately planning to break, and make others break, one of the most awful commandments in the Decalogue? So the boy lay awake through all the long and dreary night, waiting for the day. What would the day bring forth? Where would he be at the next night? "If it were only my life that was to be taken, even if it were only my soul that was to be risked, but the awful fiat of the Most High to be broken, purposely, deliberately broken. Oh, Heaven, how one man's sin makes many men's crimes!" So thinking, so feeling, so suffering, Le passed the most miserable night of his whole life. The gray light of the winter day dawned at last. Then Le arose and slowly dressed himself. Roland, he thought, would soon be with him, bringing the acceptance of his challenge, and the program of the hostile meeting. Slowly he descended the stairs and entered the parlor. Early as it was, the window shutters had been opened, the fire kindled, and the room put in order. Le threw up the window sash to inhale the fresh air. It was keen and cold this winter morning, yet refreshing to his fevered head. The sun was up and shining from a clear blue sky upon the snow-covered earth, and the forest of pine beyond, and the grove of cedars, spruce, firs, and other evergreens near the house. Le closed the window at length, and sat down to wait for the coming of Roland Bayard. Old Luke came in with oak logs to replenish the fire. "Mornin', young marster. Gettin' colder, ain't it? Shouldn't wonder ef de creek didn't froze ober 'fore night," he said, as he laid the logs carefully on the blazing brands. Le assented, in a low voice, scarcely knowing what had been said to him, or what he said. The man retired, and was succeeded by the woman, Martha, who came in to set the table for her master's breakfast. "Mornin', Marse Le. Hope as you're feelin' better'n yer did las' night, dough. Lor' knows, now I look at yer don't look any better. Yer looks wuss. 'Deed, Marse Le, yer ought to 'sult a doctor," she said, as she opened the tablecloth and flirted it out to spread over the table, keeping her eyes on the young master all the time. "I am not ill, Martha," he said. "Ain't yer now, Marse Le? Well, den, yer's gwine to be, dat's all," was the encouraging comment. She brought in the breakfast, and spread it temptingly out on the table, a thankless task, for, as before, Le could not be persuaded to choke himself by attempting to swallow a morsel of solid food, but he drank cup after cup full of strong coffee as fast as the woman could pour it out. "Kill yerself, 'deed you will, Marse Le, drinkin' so much strong coffee, and puckerin' ob yer stomach up, 'stead o' fillin' ob it out wid bread and meat. Kill yerself, 'deed yer will," said Martha, as at last she cleared the table and left the room. "Yes, sah, dere he is in de little parlor," Le heard her say, as she passed through the hall to some one at the front door. And in another moment the room door was thrown open, and Roland Bayard appeared. "Well?" demanded Le, excitedly, as he started up to meet his friend. "Well, I can't find the sneak. I believe he has cut and run, that's what I believe!" exclaimed Roland, snatching his hat from his head, flinging it angrily on the floor, and throwing himself into a chair. "What?" cried Le, facing him. "I say the beat has beat a retreat." "What do you mean?" inquired Le. Then Roland, having recovered his breath, told Le the story of his fruitless adventure at the Calvert house. "He keeps me out of the way on purpose, but he shall not escape me!" exclaimed Le, drawing his breath hard. "I only came to report to you, and take orders for the next step," said Roland. "He still retains his room at the Calvert?" inquired Le. "Oh, yes, and all his effects are there." "Then, dear boy, go back at once to the Calvert, and stay there until he returns, and then give him my note. Take up your lodgings at the house, if need be, until you discharge your mission," said Le. "Yes, yes, certainly, with pleasure, but " "But what?" "If you could lend me the loan of a strong pair of boots, or, better still, a good saddle horse, it might help the cause a little," replied Roland, laughingly extending both his feet to exhibit his own battered Wellingtons. "What a beast I am!" cried Le, smiting his forehead with his open palm in self disgust. "You have walked all this distance in my cause, while I have a dozen horses turning to stone for want of exercise in the stables there." And he snatched up an iron hand bell, that might have served for a county church or a steamboat, and rang it loudly. Old Luke put in his gray head at the door. "Saddle Jasper for Mr. Bayard, and bring him around to the door." "Yes, sah. Yer's two gemmen askin' for yer, Marse Le," said the old man. "Two gentlemen? Who are they? Let them come in," said Le. And even as he spoke, two men entered the parlor, and each laying a hand on the shoulder of the youth, said: "You are my prisoner. Yield quietly. It will be best." CHAPTER 33.